And joining us now to talk third-party politics, the president of the New Democratic Party of Canada, Peggy Nash. Welcome back to TVO.
Thanks very much.
We've had you on this program numerous times, but that was in your day as an elected MP. First time that you've been here as president. Let me start by reading you something Thomas Walcom had in the Toronto Star a month ago. He wrote, "Inside the party, everybody held views. Some thought the party was too beholden to organized labor and wanted to cut all ties. Some thought the NDP was too left-wing and should instead embrace small business and fiscal orthodoxy. In the days when former British Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair was still popular, the right, including then New Democrat and now Liberal MP Bob Rae, wanted their party to become more Blairist. In the days when anti-globalization protests were still in vogue, the left wanted their party to disband itself and then align with a loosely defined social action groups in order to create a new NDP." Well, welcome to the job. This is one of the more interesting big tent parties in this country. Obviously, all of this is some of what you have to deal with as a president of the party, and I want to know what you think your biggest challenge is as president of the NDP.
Well, of course, we're a party that's lively and debating, and we have all kinds of views within the NDP. But I think the biggest challenge that we face as a progressive party is to inspire people to get engaged and to see the New Democratic Party as a movement for progressive change in this country.
You've always said that. You've always said you don't want to be a party, you want to be a movement. Do you think people are still open to the notion of your party, which after all is, what, now 50 years old almost, as a movement?
Well, I think people do need to be engaged, and one of the things that I want to do and plan to do and am doing as party president is to re-engage people. We've had a very long period of time now when the dominant mantra has been, let's turn everything over to the market, let's deregulate everything, everything's got to be privatized because the private sector does it better. And our view has always been that we need an engaged public sector, we need an engaged government in order to make things fairer for people. And I think there's an opening now. I think there's an opportunity now to say, you know what, we can't just turn everything over to the marketplace, but we need people to get involved, whether you care about tenant rights, whether you're someone who cares mainly about environmental issues, workplace issues, that there is a role for you to make change, electoral change, and make governmental change through the NDP.
But that's what's fascinating about this time, because much of what the NDP has championed for years is actually being implemented by governments of all stripes around the world, whether they're Republican in the United States once upon a time or conservative here or wherever. And yet there doesn't appear to be a sort of an associated bump in the polls or apparent increase in respect for what the NDP stands for in Canada. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think there's any simple answer to that, but I do look at when people are asked who they feel is the greatest Canadian in the history of our country. They didn't choose our first prime minister or any prime minister. They chose Tommy Douglas because he inspired people, but he also showed people that concretely they could make change. And that's what he did as Premier of Saskatchewan and as federal leader of the New Democratic Party in Ottawa. And he made a change that all Canadians support. It would have been great if they'd thought at the time, let's make that guy Prime Minister. They didn't, but still I think the importance is he made a huge difference for people that will go on for generations.
You became president at your party's convention in Halifax, right, back in August, and you got if I may say, a Saddam Hussein-like vote of approval. That 92.5% is a pretty good vote of approval. Why'd you want this job in the first place?
I know somebody said they offered the job, but everybody else stepped back. But, I don't feel that way. I feel that there are a variety of ways to make change. Electoral politics is one of those ways. And that having been a member of Parliament, having been a social activist, a community activist, that I have a unique perspective, and I believe in the political process. I believe in the New Democratic Party as a vehicle for making change. So I want to help inspire people to get involved.
But what is it you see about this party that clearly inspires you and makes you want to get involved and push that rock up the cliff that you think others don't see?
Well, you know, I think most people, frankly, and I see it when I knock on doors in an election campaign, most people, they're either very busy with their lives, they don't pay a lot of attention to politics. I think a lot of women, when you say, you know, I'm here for an election, you know, I'm here to campaign for an election, they think of the horse race. You know, this team or that team, this guy, that guy, and they think, that's not for me. But if you ask them about a particular issue, their kids' education or the environment or a park down the street, they get very, very passionate about things they care about. So I think what we haven't done a good enough job, not just in the New Democratic Party, but in all parties, is helping people make the connection between what they care about and the electoral process.
I wonder if part of the difficulty you have, I mean, if you just, sorry, this is a bit of more horse race as opposed to what you just said, but when you look at this country right now, if you're a center-right voter, you got one choice. There's the Conservative Party of Canada over there. If you're a center-left voter, you got the Liberals, New Democrats. If you're in Quebec, you've got the Bloc. You've even got the Greens now as well. Is it time for some of you parties on the left to merge?
Well, you know, we hear a lot about this. I thought that Jack Layton really showed leadership earlier this year in pushing cooperation amongst opposition parties to form a coalition. I personally thought that was the right thing to do and could have brought a very progressive government to the people of Canada. I think that it was kind of shocking for a lot of people. They didn't know that that was possible within our parliamentary system, which absolutely it is. But I think that kind of cooperation is important, and in many modern democracies, in Europe, for example, that's quite standard because they have a proportional representation system.
But if I'm reading between the lines, you're saying no to mergers. Yes to cooperation, but no to mergers.
Well, I don't rule anything out, but I do think that there are clear differences between the parties, and I think it might be easier to get agreement on specific issues. So, for example, I mean, the Liberal Party, we had serious disagreements with them during the Chrétien years, and it's one of the reasons I decided to run to become member of Parliament. Was we had some of the biggest cuts to social spending in the history of our country. I mean, Mr. Martin quite proudly said he's taken social spending as a percentage of GDP back to the year 1951, which was kind of shocking to me. So I see some areas of potential cooperation, but I don't think you have a complete harmonization of
okay, but if you want to talk differences, I mean, the Progressive Conservative Party and the Reform Party, Canadian Alliance Party, I mean, they had some pretty big differences, and yet they finally figured out they wanted to stop losing elections and win, and they got their act together, and guess what? Now they're the government. Do you not see that as a potential template for the future of, I don't know, the Liberals and the NDP, or the Greens and the NDP, or the NDP and somebody over there?
Well, I think that certainly there are certain areas where we have a community of interests. I can't rule out that in the future there would never be any kind of cooperation. I can't predict.
But you keep saying cooperation rather than merger. Are you open to merger?
I'm open to discussions that will lead to a progressive outcome. Merger, to my way of thinking, implies a complete harmony of policies, a complete harmony of perspective.
And you're not sure about that?
In fact, I don't see a complete harmony of interest between any of the existing parties. Do I see areas of cooperation? Yes. Who knows what future political configurations we'll have, what future parties we'll have. I'd like to see a future, quite frankly, where we have a system of proportional representation where people can try, you know, they can vote what party they support. They don't have to vote this to stop that, or if this might happen, that might happen. I think people ought to be able to say, this is what I believe in, and that's the party I want to support.
We've had minority government for 5 years. So you've been, and if that's the issue you want, why didn't you make your support of one of the governments in power conditional upon putting some kind of PR system in place? You never have.
No, we haven't. I guess we've focused on other issues. We could have chosen that issue. It wasn't one that we chose, but it's something that we have campaigned on and believe very strongly in, and I don't want to predict what a future platform will look like.
But when it came time for the rubber to hit the road, you know, we won't support this government unless you bring in a PR system. The NDP wasn't there on an issue that, you know, on the face of it would improve their representation in Parliament significantly. How come?
Well, because I guess if you look at either the Conservatives or the Liberals, they would probably rather eat glass than support a proportional representation system, because they know that they would not be able to achieve a majority government, or it's more difficult to achieve a majority government under that system.
I'm beating a dead horse here. Moving on, moving on. Who's this? Oh, this is your friend Barry Weissleader from the Socialist Action newspaper, who wrote, former federal leader Ed Broadbent told the delegates not to abandon the core values that have guided the party since the 1960s. Alexa McDonough, who led the party in the 1990s, told the Globe and Mail, there needs to be change as the world changes around us, but what isn't going to change is our basic values, and most of our policies simply build on those values. Although such views express an enduring commitment to the utopian concept of reforming capitalism into a humane alternative, they do conflict with the direction articulated by such party operatives as UBC Professor Michael Byers, former Layton staffer Ian Capstick, MPs Brian Massey from Windsor, Paul Dewar from Ottawa, who would, quote, professionalize and modernize the party to such a degree that it would disappear as a force for independent, working-class political action. Do you agree that there are, you know, I don't want to say irreconcilable differences, but pretty strong differences within your party as to what it ought to be?
Do we have a lively debate? Absolutely. Do we have irreconcilable differences? No, absolutely not. Our convention in Nova Scotia, in fact, had good, lively debate, but there was overwhelming support and solidarity behind our leader, Jack Layton, and overwhelming support for the major resolutions that came forward and the major planks that our party stands for. Are we always going to have debate? We should do more of this or less of that.
What about core values, though? When you think NDP today, what are the core values you want people to think of?
I think our core values are pretty clear. We support strong social programs. We support intervening in the market, economic development, strong economic strategy. We don't just believe in turning everything over to the market. Strong environmental values. We have a leader who has the strongest environmental qualifications in the country, I would argue, better than the leader of the Green Party.
Than Elizabeth May, yeah.
Well, Jack Layton's got the track record. Look at what he did as a city councillor, and look what he was able to what he's been able to do in pushing forward.
Did you read her book?
Motions in the House of Commons.
If you didn't, I don't know if you read her book. Did you read her book?
No, I didn't read her book.
Okay, I think chapter 1 in her book, or maybe it's the preface. He pulled the plug, your leader, on the Paul Martin government just before a conference on the environment in Canada was going to come to some unprecedented, far-reaching agreement on the environment, and she claims that Jack Layton pulled the plug on that government and missed an opportunity to get that environmental progress for crass political reasons because he saw potential to win more seats in an ensuing election. So that's why she feels, obviously, she's greener than him. You don't agree?
Well, you know, people can always say that, you know, I was going to do this, I was going to do that, you know, I was almost there, I was almost going to make this change. But I look at Jack Layton's record in terms of the changes he made in the city of Toronto, the tower redevelopments, the retrofitting, concrete, practical changes that he didn't say, I'm thinking of doing it, but in fact, these are things that he did. And I look at that record and I think it's second to none.
I want to ask you about the one thing that ultimately never happened at your convention, but certainly got a lot of play. And I love Tommy Douglas's old line, the New Democratic Party will remain that as long as New York remains New York. And that means a long time. You thought about changing the name. Quote. It is a great quote, isn't it? You thought about changing the name. In the end, you decided not to debate changing the name. What do you think? What should they do?
Oh, I think they should leave the name the way it is. Nobody wanted well, not nobody, obviously somebody wanted to because a resolution went in on it. But overwhelmingly, the delegates at the convention voted not to debate it. It wasn't a priority.
Does it need a new name?
I don't believe it does. I don't believe
Is it still a new Democratic Party after 45 years?
I think it's new in the vision that it offers. I think it's new in the ideas it has about what Canada needs to become as a country that reduces inequality, that's based on fairness, and the kinds of social programs and environmental sustainability and good jobs that it wants to see in this country.
My hunch is Liberals would sign on to, most Liberals would sign on to what you just said. So
Yeah, except they'd never do it, is the problem.
Is that what distinguishes you from Liberals?
I think that's the big difference.
They say it, but they don't do it.
Yeah, well, they've said lots of things. I think back to the Red Book from Jean Chrétien, and boy, I'd sign on to a lot of what was in there. It sounded great, but what they did was go on to make massive, massive cuts to social spending. They've have never met a free trade agreement that they didn't like, and quite frankly, squandered a period of unprecedented growth in our economy when they could have been investing in programs and reducing inequality and allowed inequality to flourish in our country.
Let me ask you about what I'm assuming is a sensitive area for you, because you come out of the Canadian Auto Workers Union, and the Canadian Auto Workers Union had a rather famous break with the NDP, so you have this loyalty to these two institutions that seem to be in conflict with each other right now. How do you resolve that?
I love them both. I've spent my working life as a labor activist, and I believe that there is a real imbalance in Canada in addressing the rights of working people. We're seeing a decline of union density. Fewer and fewer people are getting access to a union, and we're seeing it because real wages are stagnant and more people are falling into poverty. So I think the role of the labor movement is essential and is independent of what a political party is doing. I think that yes, there have been frictions over the years, and there are always going to be frictions, but I think that there was unqualified support for me running as an MP, to become an MP, and there was support for me to run as party president.
But you know, some people think that in this day and age it's no longer consistent with the efforts of a big tent political party to be broadly based and represent all Canadians, when so many special provisions for organized labor are still a part of the way the NDP operates. Can you explain why I presume you think it still makes sense to give labor that special position inside your party?
Because I think the two mainstream parties, the Liberals and Conservatives, clearly side with the employers' interests around free trade and privatization, deregulation that's got us into this economic mess that we're in today. And the New Democratic Party unabashedly stands for people and fairness for people. And the labor movement represents the average person who is trying to get a fair shake in their workplace. To me, it just makes perfect sense. Now, that doesn't mean that the New Democratic Party uniquely represents working people. Obviously, we see ourselves as a big tent for seniors, for students, for environmentalists, and I think their interests are represented through the New Democratic Party.
Okay, let's talk a bit about what's going on in Ottawa these days, and this from the Canadian Press. There is no shame in not being goaded into an election you don't want, said one NDP insider who said most of the party's caucus were against taking the government down now. Our preference remains fighting for the unemployed rather than fighting for a second election, leader Jack Layton told reporters in a prepared statement. But make no mistake about it, we have no intention of giving this government a blank check like Liberal leader Michael Ignatieff and the Liberals did. I want to know, it's a perfectly defensible position, and you know, Jack Layton's been out there making the case. What I want to know is, how much of a kicking are you taking from your base, because at the end of the day, you're voting to keep a Conservative government alive?
Well, let me just clarify that there have been in the past Conservative bills that have come forward that all opposition parties have supported. So that's nothing new. The issue is the confidence motion. And our view was simple, that we had an opportunity here. I mean, Michael Ignatieff had come out earlier this fall and said that he didn't have any confidence in the government, and it didn't seem to be based on anything. He and his predecessor, Stéphane Dion, had voted in confidence measures over 70, 79 times in support of the government, and then suddenly they changed, but there didn't seem to be an issue. And Jack Layton quite rightly saw that as an opening, an opportunity to try to negotiate an improvement around a very pressing issue, which is EI. And Stephen Harper came forward and has offered a change that will result in $1 billion being put into our EI system, which, again, it was under the Liberal Party that it was changed in the 1990s, and that has disqualified so many working people. Is what the bill that's on the table now, is that the solution to EI? No, we have another 12 bills that we're putting forward to try to improve EI. But okay, the choice is you can get $1 billion for people that you've looked in the eye and you see that their benefits are running out, and you have an opportunity to give them more money to pay their bills and support their family. Or you can go to an election that nobody wants.
Okay, and again, let's put it on the table. That is a perfectly legitimate and defensible position to take.
I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question, which was, are we getting negative feedback from people as a result of that? And I've been to a number of nomination meetings and general meetings. I was just at a big meeting last night in Brampton, and no, absolutely not. I think initially people were saying, what the heck are we doing? But now they see the legislation that's coming forward. Is it a panacea? No, but it's concrete progress, and it makes sense to keep, if we can, on a case-by-case basis going forward, actually get improvements that we support, why wouldn't we do that?
Well, okay, that's one side of the story. The other side of the story, which people say, is that you're afraid of having your ass handed to you in the next election if it were to be called right now, and that's why you don't want to go to the polls right now.
I don't see that. We're absolutely election ready. We have all the money in place to spend the maximum. We have all of our campaign positions in place. Vast majority of our ridings, we have people ready to go there. So no, we're absolutely election ready.
Wasn't fear of an election campaign that at the end of the day prompted you to support the government?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's an opportunity here to do something concrete for people who are facing a huge economic shock, and it's a disgrace that our government has not understood the crisis that so many people are going through.
Well, I don't know if the PM was thinking of you guys when he did this bit at the National Arts Center, but let's play a little clip from it anyway. Go ahead, roll tape, please, Michael. He gets high with a little help from his friends, and I gather, I don't know if he's referring to you as the friends, but some people are saying you guys are the guys who are his friends right now and keeping him alive. Okay, on the EI issue, I hear what you're saying. Mm-hmm. What will be the issue, in your view, where the New Democrats say to themselves, look, we got to draw the line in the sand here?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's be clear. For 79 times, Michael Ignatieff and Stéphane Dion before him voted in support of the Harper government when they made cuts to pay equity, when they extended the war in Afghanistan.
Because they were afraid to go to the polls.
Cuts to social programs, and we voted against it.
Because they were afraid to go back to the polls.
This time, we have made a decision to vote in favor of something that we have been advocating, and I think that makes perfect sense. And there's lots more we'd like to see. Pension security for seniors. We want to make sure the government lives up to its commitment to get out of Afghanistan.
So if they were to extend the admission in Afghanistan in some way, that you could not vote for it. You'd have to vote no.
We're going to take it on a case-by-case basis, and if there are things that go opposed to what we stand for, then we're not going to continue to support them.
Peggy, let me ask you one last thing. The perennial question for New Democrats. Mm-hmm. Would you rather be the so-called conscience of Parliament, or would you rather win, knowing that winning means making all of those awful, sticky compromises that at the end of the day really tarnish your brand?
That sounds like a fork in the chess game where you have no good answer. I believe that we need to stay with our core principles and fight to represent people to the very best of our ability. I know our members of parliament are the hardest working of any party. I see the kind of great work that they do, but would Canadians benefit from a new Democratic Party government? I would love to see that day. I think Canada would be a stronger country. I look to the great democracies of Western Europe and some of the incredible changes that Social Democrats have been able to make there, and I think it would be a wonderful opportunity and we would relish it.
So on the question of conscience of Parliament or governing, the answer is yes.
The answer is both.
That's
you see
what I thought.
A fork in the road, take it.
That's what I thought. Thanks, Yogi. Okay. Peggy Nash, President of the NDP. Good of you to come into TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Steve.